The sun scorched the pavement as two guns were drawn on a kneeling man, hands raised, posture steady despite his age. Samuel Washington, 79 years old, kept his gaze fixed, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. He was at the gas station, surrounded by curious stares, phones held high, and two young officers who had no idea who they were dealing with. Nobody there could have guessed that this soft-spoken man in plain clothes had faced combat across 3 continents, led troops through war zones, and earned silent honors that never made the headlines. But that morning, none of it mattered. To them, he was just another stranger driving an old pickup truck. So how did it all begin? A few hours earlier, Samuel had woken up as he always did, at 5 o'clock sharp. No alarm needed. The smell of strong black coffee filled the kitchen. No sugar, just the way he'd learned to drink it on the battlefield. His house was simple and quiet, marked by the absence of Martha, his companion of so many years. He never complained about the loneliness. He had learned to live with it, like it was just another rhythm of time. He slipped into his worn-out jeans, his usual shirt, and the old navy blue cap. Martha always said he should have retired ages ago. In his shirt pocket, a folded photo of his wife. Not for superstition, just habit, love. Today was the day to buy barbed wire and staples to fix the fence out back. Just another Saturday. Or so he thought. The old Ford F-100 sat where it always did, under the shade of the oak tree. The engine coughed like a grumpy veteran, but came to life. Samuel knew every sound that truck made like it was part of his own body. Calmly, he took the dirt road, kicking up dust, his eyes catching details most would miss. A hawk gliding through the sky, the deep green of nearby crops, the earthy scent of soil still damp from the previous night's rain. As he reached the highway and saw the sign for town, a faint weight settled on his chest. Cedar Valley had grown. This was the same town where he'd raised his daughter, where he'd buried Martha, where he tried to hold on to a piece of peace. But something felt off. A subtle shift in the air, a quiet unfamiliarity he couldn't quite name. At the station on Main Avenue, he parked at the furthest pump. The truck's engine drew some glances. A group of teenagers laughed loudly near the convenience store. A woman locked her car doors as he walked by. The stares, the whispers, the body language. It wasn't new. Samuel had grown up in the American South back in the 60s. He knew exactly what those signs meant. He stayed silent, pumping gas calmly. His movements were steady, his body alert, like on the night patrols he'd done in Vietnam. When he was done, he walked into the store, paid cash, thanked the cashier, and headed back to his truck. That's when he noticed the police cruiser slowly crossing the street, headlights on, even though it was bright outside. 2 young officers inside. They didn't get out. They just watched. Samuel started the truck. He was ready to leave, but the sound of the cruiser doors opening froze him inside. The 2 officers approached, hands close to their weapons, aggressive stance. And in that moment, like a jolt in his chest, Samuel understood. The world might change on the surface, but some judgments stay rooted exactly where they've always been. If this story is already striking a chord with you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what's coming next is even more powerful. Samuel calmly turned off the engine and stepped out of the truck without rushing. Hands visible, movement slow and deliberate. His posture didn't show fear, but the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The officers took position behind the vehicle, eyes sharp, fingers close to their weapons. One of them looked way too nervous for the situation. The other was clearly trying to project more authority than he actually had. The age gap between them and Samuel was striking, but both seemed determined to flex their power. "We got a report about a suspicious vehicle in the area," said the younger one as he asked for ID. Samuel didn't argue. He reached for his wallet in the back pocket slowly, announcing each move, not out of submission, but out of wisdom. He knew all too well that any misunderstood gesture could end up as tomorrow's headline. The officer examined the documents with exaggerated care, like he was hoping to find a mistake, some flaw, anything to justify the stop. Around them, the atmosphere at the gas station started to shift. The group of teens edged closer. The woman in her car was still watching. A delivery man, dressed in uniform, had begun recording discreetly with his phone. Samuel stayed composed, but his eyes scanned the scene. This wasn't just a 79-year-old man being questioned. This was a trained veteran, reading body language, sensing threats, spotting patterns, and something in the air told him this wasn't going to end here. "You've been driving this vehicle in this condition?" the officer asked, gesturing dismissively toward the old truck. Samuel answered firmly, "All the paperwork is up to date. It passed inspection 4 months ago." The other officer, trying to take control of the conversation, stepped forward. "Are you feeling okay? Maybe a little confused? At your age, some folks shouldn't be behind the wheel anymore." That wasn't a question. It was a veiled insult, an attempt to undermine him. Samuel took the hit in silence. He had dealt with that same brand of judgment back when he was the only black soldier in entire battalions. He knew exactly what that line was meant to imply. Still, he held his ground. "I'm fine, officer. Just out picking up some supplies to fix the fence on my land." The answer didn't sit well. The two men exchanged glances. They were clearly trying to find something, anything, to justify taking him in, searching his behavior for a mistake that wasn't there. Around them, more phones were raised. Whispers spread. Some onlookers watched with curiosity. Others were starting to feel something wasn't right. "Maybe it's best if we escort you to the station for a medical checkup," one of them said. It was a bluff. Samuel knew that. A psychological tactic. But he didn't flinch. "I'd like to know what crime I'm being accused of," he said, his voice firm. The question caught them off guard. For the first time, they hesitated. There was no crime. No charge, just bias, plain and simple. The silence that followed was suddenly cut by a new threat. "You don't get to play lawyer with us. You're coming with us now." The tone shifted, from inquiry to command, from protocol to intimidation. Samuel didn't respond with anger. He responded with presence. He was surrounded, but he wasn't alone. The crowd was growing. Eyes were watching closely. And in that moment, it wasn't just about his dignity anymore. It was about what each person there would choose to do with what they were about to witness. And that's when it happened. Just as the tension peaked, a new voice rose from the crowd. "Excuse me!" The voice cut through the crowd, firm, gravelly, and impossible to ignore. A middle-aged man with grease-stained clothes and a confident stride stepped between the officers and Samuel. "Tony Martinez. I own the auto shop on the corner. And this man right here is a war hero." The officers exchanged looks, dismissive. One of them even let out a short laugh, clearly trying to brush off the claim. But Tony stood his ground. "Sergeant Samuel Washington. Vietnam, the Persian Gulf, Africa. I served too. I know a veteran when I see one." The crowd stirred. Some stepped closer. More phones came up, recording. The officers tried to keep control. "Sir, we appreciate your concern, but this is a police matter." Tony didn't flinch. "Then you won't mind if I call the airbase. Got some friends over there who'd love to hear about this." The blonde officer tried to cut him off. "That won't be necessary. We're just making sure everything's safe." But it was too late. Tony was already dialing. "Colonel Patterson, this is Corporal Martinez. There's something going on here you need to know about." Meanwhile, the deep rumble of heavy engines echoed down the avenue. At first, it was just a distant noise. Then it grew louder, steadier, until the first military Humvee appeared at the corner, followed by another, and then one more. The scene at the gas station came to a standstill. Tension turned into anticipation. The officers, who minutes before had been in control, now looked completely out of place. From the lead vehicle stepped the colonel, sharp, commanding. His presence alone said everything. He walked directly to Samuel, stopped just 2 steps away, raised his hand to his forehead, and delivered a long, respectful, silent salute. "Sergeant Washington, it's an honor to stand in your presence." Samuel returned the salute with the same crisp precision he had decades ago. The crowd went completely silent. They were witnessing something that didn't belong to everyday life in a small town. A gesture between soldiers, a kind of recognition that didn't need to be explained. The colonel turned to the officers. "Do you have any idea who you just stopped? This man has saved more lives than you'll probably ever count." The blonde officer tried to defend himself. He didn't say who he was. The colonel's reply cut through like a blade. "Because men like him don't need to say it. They just are." Phones kept recording. This was no longer about a routine stop. It was the unraveling of a judgment, the unveiling of a truth that had been overlooked because of an appearance. The colonel turned back to Samuel. "Would you like to file a formal complaint, sir? I can assure you, there will be consequences." But Samuel, as always, responded in his own way. With a calm gaze and steady voice, he said, "These young men made a mistake, but everyone deserves the chance to learn from their mistakes." Then he looked directly at the two officers. "True greatness isn't in intimidation, it's in protection. Learn that, and do better." Time seemed to freeze, and just when everyone thought the moment had reached its peak, something else was about to happen that no one could have seen coming. Samuel's words lingered in the air like a lesson unspoken, but deeply felt. The officers lowered their eyes. The blonde one, clearly shaken, took a deep breath before speaking. "Sir, we're sorry. Really. We didn't know." Samuel nodded slowly. "Ignorance can be fixed by listening. What matters now is what you choose to do with this experience." Behind him, Colonel Patterson stood silently, arms crossed, like a man who recognized a kind of authority that went far beyond rank. He knew Samuel by reputation, from records and stories, but had never seen him in action. And now it was clear why that man was so respected. The colonel stepped forward. "Sergeant, allow us the honor of escorting you to your next stop. It's the least we can do." But Samuel just smiled, a quiet smile, full of peace. "Colonel, I appreciate it, but I just need to buy some barbed wire. Got a fence to finish." His tone was calm, but the meaning ran deep. He didn't want praise. He just wanted to go on with his day, fix his land, tend to his animals. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though many still came up to shake his hand, moved by what they had witnessed. One elderly woman, clearly emotional, held his hand gently. "I judged you too, just by the way you looked. I'm sorry." Samuel slowly took off his cap. "We all have things to learn. What matters is that we're willing." Tony Martinez came back over. "Today, you reminded me why I swore to protect my people. It was an honor, Sergeant." Samuel gripped his hand firmly. "You did what most wouldn't. That's worth more than any medal." Just then, the two officers stepped closer, a little hesitantly. The taller one, who had earlier spoken so sharply, now had a softened voice. "Would you let us go with you? We want to show you we've learned something." Samuel looked at them for a moment, then gave a simple nod. "Let's go." The sight that followed was hard to believe. Samuel, flanked by two officers and followed by a military convoy, walked calmly down the town's sidewalk. Not like a man under escort, but like one being honored. At the hardware store, the owner refused payment. "You deserve far more than this." And despite all the thank yous, Samuel didn't want to be treated like a hero. He just wanted to go home. On the ride back, the blonde officer broke the silence. "You've got a lot of medals, don't you?" Samuel smiled. "I do, but it's not the metal that matters. It's the lesson each one carries." The young man hesitated before asking, "And today, what's the lesson we take with us?" Samuel stopped walking. He looked both officers in the eye. That respect doesn't come from the uniform. It comes from having an open heart. That power isn't meant to humiliate. It's meant to protect. And that humility changes more than any speech ever could. The two didn't answer. They simply nodded, their faces reflecting a mix of shame, gratitude, and a new kind of understanding. It was the beginning of a change, not of policies, but of awareness. Back at the station, Samuel gently placed the barbed wire in the truck bed. The colonel approached one last time. "This day will be remembered, Sergeant. What you did here is going to reach Washington." Samuel closed the tailgate and replied without hurry, "I didn't do it to be remembered. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Then he climbed into the truck. The engine came to life with its usual growl, but that day, the sound carried something else. It was the sound of a man who held onto his integrity in the face of injustice, who turned public humiliation into a collective lesson. As he drove back to the farm, he thought of Martha. He thought of the officers. He thought of the woman who asked for forgiveness. He thought of an entire town that, for a few moments, had stopped to listen to the wisdom of a man no one had really seen before. A man who, even in silence, taught more than words ever could. On the radio, news reports had already picked up the story. The video of the salute was spreading online. But Samuel turned the dial off. There was still a fence to fix. And that's what mattered. If this story touched your heart, share it. Leave a comment about the moment that moved you most. and check out the next video coming up on your screen.